At 95 years old, people thought he was simply waiting for time to pass in silence, but then, on a fateful evening, he stepped onto the stage, sat under the lights, and sang a note that silenced the entire room. In a small town on the edge of the Vermont woods, snow had begun to fall gently on the eaves of Cedar Pines, a worn-out nursing home that time seemed to have forgotten. February winds slipped through the foggy window panes, leaving a world of white outside and a hushed stillness within. In the room at the end of the second-floor hallway lived a quiet 95-year-old man named Elliot Marston. No one really noticed him. He had no relatives who came to visit. He didn't join the craft classes or the afternoon slow dances organized by the home. Every morning, he sat on a wooden bench by the window, holding a cup of tea, eyes watching the sparrows gather on the bare trees. "Mr. Marston is kind, but very quiet," a nurse once said. "Wears the same old brown sweater every day, sits there for hours." No one knew, not even the longtime staff, that he had once sung on stage at Carnegie Hall in 1952, that his voice had once been compared to velvet in a winter dusk, and that he hadn't sung a single note in 70 years, ever since he lost a woman named Eliza. In his youth, Elliot was not someone who stood out. He had been a postal worker by day and sang opera in small theaters by night. But his God-given voice had carried him from street cafes to prestigious stages. People said he had the ability to quiet an entire room with a single note. Then he met Eliza, a passionate pianist and the great love of his life. They had once promised to go to Vienna together, home to the Staatsoper, where they both dreamed of performing. But war, life, and a single missed meeting separated them. When Eliza died in a car accident in 1953, Elliot never sang again, not once. No wedding, no album, no more audiences. Just silence. Time passed, and Elliot withdrew from the spotlight. He lived in a small apartment, and when his health began to fade, he moved into Cedar Pines. A part of his memory was locked away in an old wooden box beneath his bed, holding a photo of Eliza, a few handwritten music sheets, and a worn-out tape no one had a machine to play. Then one day, Cedar Pines hired a new activities coordinator named Rachel Lynn, 29 years old. Rachel was different. She didn't just schedule activities, she sat down to really talk. She remembered each person's name, each story told over and over again, and every song they used to love. "Do you love music?" Rachel asked Elliot one March afternoon as the snow outside began to melt. He looked at her, his eyes slow and faded, and replied with a quiet nod. "Puccini and Eliza." The answer made Rachel pause mid-note. "Who is Eliza?" Elliot said no more. But that afternoon, for the first time in many years, he asked Rachel to play Che Gelida Menina. And as the first notes came from the small speaker, he closed his eyes. His hands, trembling with age, rested on his knees and tapped gently with the rhythm. And then he sang. Not loud, not crisp or perfectly enunciated, but real, and so beautiful that Rachel couldn't hold back her tears. That night, Elliot couldn't sleep. He sat up, reached under the bed, and pulled out the wooden box. Eliza's photograph was still there, faded. On the music sheet, the brown-inked handwriting had blurred with time, but he could still read it. Eliza had once written, "If one day I'm no longer here, sing for me even just one note. I will hear it." Elliot folded the paper gently, like folding a memory. And for the first time in nearly 7 decades, he sang a small passage from Non ti scordar di me, the song they once sang together at the old piano. In the darkness of the nursing home, an aged voice quietly floated past the walls, through the hallways, and came to rest where the snow still fell outside the window. Since the afternoon Elliot sang for the first time in 70 years, Rachel no longer looked at him with pity but with reverence. Not the kind usually reserved for the elderly, but the kind one gives to survivors, those who have endured loss, war, and time, and still manage to keep something beautiful inside. The following week, Rachel began visiting his room more often. She brought printed sheet music from the internet, a few classical music CDs, and sometimes just 2 cups of hot tea. Elliot didn't talk much, but occasionally he would share fragmented stories about a snowy night in 1948 in Boston when Eliza nearly slipped on stage. About the time they sat together listening to Pavarotti in New York. About the ticket to Vienna they never used. "I used to think I'd never sing again," Elliot said, his voice hoarse, eyes gazing distantly through the window. That voice was buried with Eliza. Rachel didn't respond right away. She knew that some wounds couldn't be healed by words of comfort. But music was different. Music didn't demand explanations. It only asked to be heard. One Friday afternoon, as the nurses were switching shifts, Rachel brought in a small recording device and a mini electric keyboard from the activity room. She set them in the corner of Elliot's room and asked softly, "Would you like to try recording a bit? Just for yourself." Elliot hesitated. His trembling hands rested on his knees. A breeze stirred the curtain by the window. Then he nodded. Rachel began playing the opening chords of Non ti scordar di me, not perfectly, but warmly. Elliot closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and as he sang, the room seemed to hold its breath. His voice no longer resonated like it once did in youth, but it held something that time could never take truth. Each note carried memory, as if Eliza were standing in the room, smiling at him through the mirror of the past. Rachel didn't dare do anything with the recording for a few days. She simply listened to it over and over alone, each time feeling her nose sting with emotion. Finally, she asked Elliot if she could share the clip with a few friends who worked in elder care, as proof that sometimes what an elderly person needs isn't new medicine or a packed schedule, but simply someone who listens in the right way. Elliot smiled gently. "Do what you think is right." Rachel uploaded the minute-long recording to a small Facebook group for geriatric care workers. She didn't expect within just 48 hours, the recording spread like a quietly growing fire. Comments came in from everywhere. "I played this for my 88-year-old mother and she cried. My husband lost his voice from a stroke, but this made him smile for the first time in 2 years. I never thought a 95-year-old voice could move me to tears." A music professor from Pennsylvania reached out, asking if they could play the clip in a class on 20th century music history. A geriatric physician from Oregon wrote a thank you letter, saying that Elliot had made him rethink how he approached emotional treatment for the elderly. A few weeks later, Rachel walked into Elliot's room with an envelope. "You've got a letter." "A letter?" Elliot frowned. "There's no one left to send me letters." She handed him the envelope, her hands slightly trembling. It was from the Vermont Music Society, who were preparing for their 100th anniversary gala. In the letter, they wrote that Elliot's video had touched the hearts of the organizing committee, and they wanted to invite him to perform live at the gala. Elliot fell silent. His hands tightened gently around the letter, then slowly laid it on his lap. "Perform?" he asked, as if the word had vanished from his living vocabulary. Rachel sat down beside him. "Just one song. You won't have to stand for long. We'll take it slow. But you don't have to decide right away." He looked out the window. Snow was beginning to fall again. He thought of the golden lights at Carnegie Hall, of Eliza's eyes under the stage lights, her hand resting on the piano keys. A thin smile appeared on his deeply wrinkled face. "You think they'd still want to hear an old man sing?" Rachel gently squeezed his hand. "I think they need it more than ever." The news that Elliot Marston had been invited to perform at the Vermont Music Society's 100th anniversary gala spread through the hallways of Cedar Pines like a strange and wondrous breeze. The next morning at breakfast, instead of the usual talk about medications or weather, everyone was abuzz. "Mr. Elliot, that old man who always sits by the window? He used to be a singer, right? I heard he once performed at Carnegie Hall. My goodness." Elliot heard it all, but he said nothing, just smiled softly, sipping his tea. Inside him, something stirred, part joy, part trembling fear. It had been 70 years since he last stepped onto a stage. His body was no longer agile, his voice no longer sharp, and his memory sometimes clear, sometimes as hazy as the morning fog. But deep in his chest, beneath the folds of age, something had come alive again. Rachel became his companion, his manager, and his tireless encourager. She adjusted her schedule, brought him light vocal warm-ups every morning, old sheet music in the afternoons, and quiet evening conversations just to listen to the memories he thought he'd forgotten. One day, as she helped him try on an old suit jacket in preparation for the performance, Elliot said softly. You know, there was once a night I nearly signed a record deal in Chicago, but I backed out because Eliza didn't want to leave New York. Rachel didn't respond. She simply adjusted the collar for him, gently, because she understood each story was a note in the symphony of a life. A few days before the performance, the Music Society sent a private driver to take Elliot and Rachel into the city for a stage rehearsal. Everything was arranged simply, just as Elliot requested. No flashy lights, no modern sound effects, just a piano, a microphone, and a wooden chair. When Elliot stepped onto the empty stage for the first time to test the acoustics, the theater fell silent. Everyone there stopped what they were doing. He walked slowly, leaning on Rachel's arm, but his posture held a certain old pride, as if time itself were just another audience member in the back row, watching quietly. "What would you like to try first?" the sound technician asked. Elliot looked around, his eyes sweeping over the empty seats, then quietly said, "Begin with silence." And then, he sang. Just a short passage from Non ti scordar di me, but it carried an entire lifetime. His voice was deeper now, broken in places, but every word touched an invisible string in the listener's heart. A young volunteer plugging in cables near the stage quietly wiped away a tear. The performance came on a mild early spring evening, with a golden full moon hanging above like a natural spotlight. The auditorium was packed. Old friends, music lovers, and even strangers who had heard the recording online. They hadn't come to witness an old artist's comeback, but to be reminded that some things never grow old, like longing, like love, and like honest music. Elliot sat waiting backstage, his suit freshly pressed, silver hair neatly combed, and a small music note-shaped pin on his lapel, a gift from Rachel. "Are you ready?" Rachel asked. Elliot nodded. Ready not to be afraid anymore. And the host stepped onto the stage. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a voice untouched by time, Elliot Marston." Applause erupted, not loud or hurried, but like a warm wave wrapping around the old man stepping forward beneath the soft stage lights. He sat down, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the audience for a long moment. No rush. "It's been 70 years since I last sang for anyone," he began slowly. "I thought I'd forgotten how. But then I realized, some things, when kept in love, never truly disappear." And then Elliot began his song. It wasn't just Non ti scordar di me. It was a call from the past, a message from those no longer here, a love song not meant for any era, but for every heart still beating. As the final notes faded, Elliot remained seated on his chair. He didn't bow in thanks, nor did he rush off stage. He just sat there, silently, his gaze distant, as if he could still hear the piano in his memory, the sound Eliza once played beside him throughout a lifetime of youth. The entire auditorium held its breath. And then, applause broke out. Not the polite kind. It was an outpouring. Like a wave, people rose to their feet, row by row, section by section, the clapping swelling with cheers and muffled sobs. Some wiped away tears. An elderly woman near the front row gripped her husband's hand. A young boy, maybe 10, tugged on his mother's sleeve and asked softly, "Why is everyone crying, Mom?" No one answered right away, because somehow everyone knew. Elliot's voice had touched something deep inside each person, something no one could name, but everyone could feel. Life, loss, and the enduring beauty of sincerity. After Elliot left the stage, Rachel guided him backstage. He said nothing, only squeezed her hand. His forehead was damp with sweat, shoulders trembling slightly from exhaustion, but his eyes sparkled like a child stepping into the circus for the first time. "What did you think?" he asked quietly, short of breath, but joyful. Rachel smiled, her voice thick with emotion. Like the whole world was just reminded that it still needs to listen. A sound technician rushed over, offering a bottle of water and a towel, eyes red. "Sir, I've never heard anything like that in my life." "Thank you. Do you want to—" Elliot just nodded, then extended a hand to Rachel. "Take me home, will you? I don't need a celebration." They returned to Cedar Pines close to midnight. Elliot still wore his suit, the pin untouched, and hadn't changed his shoes. He sat quietly on his familiar bench by the window. The snow had stopped. Only the moonlight remained, casting shadows through the bare branches onto the floor. Rachel sat beside him, saying nothing. She knew, in that moment, he was reliving every memory, not just of the performance, but of a life interrupted by time, pain, and prolonged silence. "Do you miss Eliza?" Elliot asked suddenly. Rachel paused. "I never met her." "But you heard her," Elliot said softly. "In every word I sang tonight, I felt she was listening." Rachel gently placed her hand on his, and so was the world. The next day, a video of Elliot's performance was shared on the Vermont Music Society's social media page. There was no sensational headline, just a simple caption, a voice that never truly disappeared. Within 24 hours, the video had over 2 million views. Comments flooded in like waves. "I played this for my grandmother," she cried all morning. "I've never seen old age look so beautiful and dignified." His voice wasn't perfect, but that's exactly what made me believe I could begin again. "Thank you, Mr. Elliot. You healed something in me I didn't know I was carrying." The Music Society received a flood of calls not from the media, but from nursing homes, community centers, and even schools. They all wanted to know, who is this man? Could he come speak? Are there others like him who haven't yet been heard? Rachel printed out all the letters and brought them to Elliot's room. He read each one, his eyes misty but his grip firm. "You see," he whispered, "just one voice, the right voice, at the right time can move an entire generation." The following week, Cedar Pines held a small gathering in the activity room. For the first time, the elderly residents lined up to speak. They shared songs they once sang to their children, love songs they'd secretly listened to on wartime radios, or lullabies their mothers had sung to them long ago. Elliot was seated in the front row, honored as the guest of honor. "We thought our time was over," said a woman named Doris. "But thanks to Elliot, we know everyone has one final song worth singing." The room burst into applause. Rachel looked over at Elliot. He said nothing, but tears were already streaming down his face. He was no longer the invisible man on the bench by the window. Now, he was the living echo of something once forgotten and now being sung again, carried by an applause that wouldn't fade. Spring arrived late that year in Vermont. The snow melted slowly. Crocus flowers bloomed sparsely across the lawn of the Cedar Pines nursing home. In the soft stillness of the changing season, Mr. Elliot Marston entered his 96th year no longer with the eyes of a man waiting for time to end, but of someone writing the final notes with all the life he had left. After that historic performance, his life changed not loudly, but deeply. The staff at Cedar Pines began asking him more, not just about medicine or meals, but about the music he loved, the memories that remained, even the mistakes he once made. Elliot didn't refuse. He shared. He laughed. Some days he even cracked jokes, something no one had seen in years. His room became a Saturday afternoon gathering spot for those who wanted to hear stories. And music, like an invisible tide, quietly filled the home. One afternoon, he said to Rachel, "Do you see what just happened here? People are starting to listen to each other. Not just to me, but to voices that seem to have gone silent long ago." Rachel nodded. "Because you played the first note. And everyone else, they're learning how to sing the next part." End of. Soon after, with support from the Vermont Music Society and a few generous donors, Cedar Pines established a small space called the Room of Remembered Melodies, where residents could tell the stories of their lives through music, poetry, or simply memories. One corner of the room was set aside for Elliot, a wooden chair by the piano, above which hung a photo of him from the night of his performance, with a small caption, "I never disappeared. I was just waiting to be heard." Every Friday, he would still sit there, playing slow chords, occasionally humming a few lines, and listening as others shared the songs of their lives. Mrs. Sarah reciting the first poem she wrote after the war, Mr. Louis playing the blues riff he used when he proposed to his wife in 1963. Elliot never took center stage again. He stepped back, gave the spotlight to others as if he had completed his solo and was now just keeping time for the collective symphony. But time remains the final conductor. One summer morning, Elliot didn't show up to the activity room as usual. Rachel stopped by his room and found the door slightly ajar. He lay there quietly, face peaceful, his hand resting gently on the worn leather notebook where he'd recorded his daily thoughts. On the last page was a single line, written in a shaky hand: "If tomorrow I can no longer sing, let my silence be the prelude to someone else's voice." Rachel didn't cry right away. She simply sat down, held his cooling hand and whispered, "Thank you for living with your whole voice." Elliot's memorial was held 3 days later in the very room where his music had once made others weep. There was no priest, no elaborate eulogy, just a piano, a microphone, and people taking turns sharing songs tied to their memories. An elderly woman read a letter, thanking Elliot for helping her finish a song she'd abandoned in her youth. A care worker sang her mother's lullaby in French. Rachel was the last to stand, holding Elliot's leather notebook, and read a few lines of poetry he once wrote. "Do not close the page of my life in silence. Each wrinkle is a note not yet sung, and if I cannot reach the final verse, then you sing it for me." Everyone rose to their feet, unprompted. Together they sang the chorus of the song Elliot had performed at the gala. "I am still here, I am still singing. Though my hands tremble, my heart still sings. My life a song that need not be perfect, only needs someone to listen." Years later, people would still tell the story of a 95-year-old man who had been silent for 70 years before singing a song that moved the world. But to those who knew him, Elliot Marston wasn't just a rediscovered voice. He was living proof that every life, long or short, can become a song. All it takes is someone willing to listen. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If you found this video meaningful, don't forget to like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next stories. We've already selected a few other videos we think you'll love. Check them out now. Wishing you a truly wonderful day.